It's River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer. What does it mean to be a Catholic church if there's no weekend Mass? That's a question at the center of a major restructuring underway in the Archdiocese of Dubuque. Archbishop Thomas Zinkula's Journey in Faith initiative is reorganizing the Archdiocese's 160 parishes into 24 regional clusters called pastorates. Beginning July 14th, 84 of those churches will stop holding weekend Mass. The Archdiocese is insistent these churches are not closing. Weddings, funerals, and other functions can continue, but parishioners in towns like Vinton aren't reassured. And this is happening against a peculiar national backdrop. Since Robert Prevost of Chicago was elected Pope Leo XIV, that was in May of last year, the first American-born pope, Catholic conversions in the U.S. have risen. Iowa's Diocese of Des Moines reports a 50% jump in new Catholics over the prior year. So today, church consolidation in the face of rural decline and an urban church that is growing. Later in the hour, Kristy Nabhan-Warren, a scholar of Catholic studies at the University of Iowa, and at the very end, Deacon John Robbins of the Archdiocese of Dubuque will join us live. First, though, yesterday I spoke with Marcy Horst. Marcy is a parishioner at St. Mary's in Vinton. She's part of an effort to reverse the Archdiocese's decision. Marcy, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me today.
Give us a little background. What does St. Mary's there in Vinton mean to you personally? How long have you been part of the parish? And give us a sense of what it represents there in your town.
I've been at St. Mary's for 35 years. My husband and I moved to Vinton 35 years ago, and it was really the first welcoming group that we met in Vinton, and it has become our parish family over those 35 years for sure. We raised our 7 children in Vinton, and they all attended Mass in Vinton, and several of them went on to go to college at Loras in Dubuque.
And it sounds like you have a thriving parish, well-attended Masses?
Yes, we do. Our total attendance on the weekend is between 175 to 250 people, I think. And we have overall, our parish consists of about 450 people, I think.
And Marcy, I understand St. Mary's has made a number of improvements, upgrades in the last decade or so.
That's correct. In 2016, at the request of the Archdiocese or the recommendation of the Archdiocese, we put a new gathering space on the front of our church, and we made all of our entrances handicap accessible. We installed a sprinkler system for safety, and we have made our parking lot bigger, expanded it. We have 169 spaces currently, and with the almost 20 acres that we sit on, we could expand even more if we needed to.
Okay. Tell us about the moment you found out that St. Mary's, according to this plan, this restructuring, would lose weekend Mass. I understand you've been through 2 earlier versions that included Mass at St. Mary's in Vinton, and then at the end it was then removed. What happened? Tell us.
That's correct. I was the head of the JIF committee, the Journey in Faith committee for our church. So I attended all the meetings that were required, 2 in Cedar Rapids, and then we hosted our own in Vinton to discuss the plan. And at the beginning, the Archdiocese offered 2 possible plans for converging us into a pastorate. And in both of those plans, we had Mass. And in fact, in one of the plans, we had 2 Masses. And so we didn't have a lot to complain about. We made some recommendations. They asked for recommendations. We made some recommendations to possibly combine us into more of a rural pastorate instead of pushing us towards Cedar Rapids. But we're pretty happy with the situation. And so on April 11th, the new pastorates were announced, and many of them were completely different. We did not have Mass in the new pastorate. So that was the first that we found out. no Mass anymore.
What is your understanding of why that was? Did you feel that this process that you were thoroughly engaged with and others in your community there were engaged with? Do you think that the process was genuine, or did the outcome feel a bit predetermined?
We questioned that throughout the process, whether anything would change or not changed. Was it already predetermined? But we felt pretty confident because the Journey in Faith process set out a list of criteria, and we met every criteria that they put out. We have no debt. In fact, we are cash positive. We are the county seat. Vinton is the county seat. We have, as I said earlier, room to grow. We put on the gathering space. All the criteria that they asked for, we met. So we didn't understand why this had happened, why Mass was taken away from us.
Mm-hmm. No debt, accessibility improvements, room to grow. Vinton is the county seat as well. These are the criteria that the Archdiocese said it was using, and yet the decision went against St. Mary's in this restructuring. Why do you think your church still didn't make the cut after listing those criteria where I guess you fulfilled them?
There are a lot of theories about why we didn't make the cut. I think probably number one is that that Mass moved to Urbana, which is 15 miles, 20 miles away from us, is closer to Cedar Rapids. And the other two Cedar Rapids area churches that are in our pastorate, St. Elizabeth Ann Seton and St. Joseph's in Marion, would be closer to Urbana. So I'm thinking it's proximity, but that leaves out a lot of people from our area. I mean, it's just the people to the south of Vinton and the people to the west of Vinton. It's a much longer drive for them to be able to get to Urbana or any of the other churches to the east in the pastorate. So,
what would it mean not to have Mass on the weekends at St. Mary's there in Vinton and have to drive? What do you think it would change in fact?
I think that the Eucharist, which is the main part of Mass and is the source and the summit of the Catholic faith, we lose accessibility to the Eucharist on the weekends.
Receiving communion, I'm just saying that for non-Catholics.
That's correct, receiving communion. And because we could have a prayer service, something like that, but you cannot have a communion service without a priest. And as a Catholic, weekend Mass is an obligation. We have a Sunday obligation to attend weekend Mass. So for my husband and I, we're young. Young enough anyway, we can drive, and we will drive to Mass, but it really affects the elderly in our parish. And that is probably what we are most worried about. The elderly and the infirm who are not comfortable. Several of them don't drive. They are not comfortable leaving town, going that far. And at the end of their lives, they will lose their access to the sacrament. And it's kind of heartbreaking when you talk to the elderly people. They feel betrayed. They feel that they've lost something huge at the end of their lives, when Sunday Mass is kind of often their only social interaction and the only time they see people. And it's just the spiritual aspect of it for them not to be able to go to Mass, receive communion, join with their parish family is really heartbreaking. And I definitely feel like the Archdiocese and the JIF process has not addressed that aspect of this reorganization well enough. They have talked about the possibility of being able to have communion services, but they have not set anything up like that. And in fact, when we've asked about that, it has been denied. No, we want you to go to these other parishes. So I think that's one thing that the Archdiocese needs to consider. The elderly and actually the young families who have to travel a long way. I think it will stop them from attending Mass. I think people in Vinton will possibly make a choice to attend another faith community in Vinton, or they just will stop attending church altogether. And I think that's really unfortunate.
Marcy, you filed an appeal to the Archbishop Zinkula. What has been the response?
We've got no response from the appeal, so we have escalated that appeal.
And what does that look like going forward?
That basically means you send it to Rome.
I have to believe that is not a quick process for a reply.
No, it is not. It's a process that is created by Rome. It's in their court, but they say it's a 90-day wait. So we'll see if they respond in 90 days.
Rome would have to overrule Archbishop Zinkula, so to speak. Is that your understanding?
Yes, correct. And our church he hasn't issued a decree to close our church yet. This is only the reorganization of the pastorate, which involves our pastoral committees and our finance committees. So he's basically taken those things away from the church and put them in a centralized location of the pastorate.
Do you understand that the church is under, it seems, structural financial stress in the rural parts, in some rural parts, and has to have a restructuring? Do you have a better solution than what they've come to here with these, 24 pastorates?
I do understand that, and I know there are several churches that have lost a lot of attendance and are in disrepair and are not financially sound, but I do think that Vinton is not that situation. I think, and it's the county seat. I think that it affects the whole community. And personally, I would not move to a town or a city that did not have a Catholic church. So I think if you're trying to grow your church, it's a mistake.
Well, thank you for sharing your views with us, Marcy Horst, a resident of Vinton and a parishioner at St. Mary's Catholic Church there. We appreciate your view. Thank you very much, Marcy.
Thank you so much for having me.
Coming up after a short break, we'll hear from a Catholic studies scholar at the University of Iowa. And then finally, live, a deacon in the Archdiocese of Dubuque as we discuss the changing map of midwestern Catholicism. I'm Ben Kiefer. It's River to River from IPR News. And we're back with more River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer. This hour looking at two simultaneous and interesting stories in Iowa Catholicism. The Archdiocese of Dubuque restructuring dozens of rural parishes, and at the same time, urban areas in the state, as a matter of fact, across the country, seeing a noticeable rise in Catholic converts. So we have consolidation on the one hand, and at the same time, growth on the other. Coming up later in the program, we'll hear from a deacon in the Archdiocese of Dubuque live. So whether you're part of a parish facing these changes, or you're among the Iowans who've recently found or returned to the Catholic Church, we want to hear your story, your questions about this restructuring. 1-866-780-9100 or river2river@iowapublicradio.org. My next guest is Kristy Nabhan-Warren. Kristy is the Figge Chair in Catholic Studies at the University of Iowa. I spoke with her yesterday. Kristy, welcome back to our program.
Thanks so much for having me, Ben.
You describe yourself as a non-Catholic ethnographer who has spent your career studying American Catholic culture. Tell us, what is driving this type of restructuring across the country? I understand it's bigger than just Iowa, isn't it?
It is, Ben. Boy, that's a big question, a really important question. I think that historically, the American Catholic Church has experienced consolidations, closures of parishes, largely in urban areas. So most of the scholarship is on sort of urban parishes. It's been fairly recent that we've seen closures, consolidations, whether or not we call them shared parishes, cluster parishes, or the more recent linguistic pastorates. It's been a newer phenomenon, I would say, in the last 25, 30 years within sort of midwestern Catholicism in particular, where we see declining rates of Catholics participating in Mass, And so various dioceses, archdioceses across the Midwest and other parts of the country, but primarily in a broad swath of the Midwest, have had to make some really hard decisions, hopefully thoughtful decisions, right, about what to do about, the many parishes where we've seen a decline.
Kristy, what do you make of Marcy Horst's story and the situation in Vinton with St. Mary's Catholic Church, that parish, where they seem to be fulfilling the criteria set out by the Archdiocese, and yet they won't be having any more weekend Mass, it seems?
Yeah, I was really moved by Marcy's, I would say, testimonial, and also, her deep knowledge. I mean, she's been super involved. She was her parish representative, as she's shared on the JIF committee. And so as I listened to Marcy, my heart hurt in a lot of ways, because in my own research with rural Catholics as well as urban Catholics who have experienced closures and or their parish designation as no longer having the Eucharist offered on Sunday, it really hit home. It reminded me of literally the hundreds of parishioners I've interviewed, since 1994. What stood out, what Marcy shared with us, with her audience, is that it sounds like, again, I'm just going for Marcy's testimony, and I have not talked with representatives from the Archdiocese, and I know you will talk with a representative soon. It does sound like, according to Marcy at least, that they followed everything they were asked to do. It sounds like they have a robust enough attendance at their Sunday Mass. I think she makes a really compelling case for the continuation of the Eucharist being offered at their parish. And for non-Catholics listening, I was raised in a Lutheran home. My mother was raised Catholic. So I was raised, I would say, very much in a mixed faith household, very familiar with Protestant, linguistic, as well as Catholic. And so compared to, again, for non-Catholic listeners, of which I assume there might be many, for Catholics, taking the Eucharist, the consecrated host, is literally the body and blood of Christ, and only a priest can consecrate the host. And so it is qualitatively and really quantitatively different for Roman Catholics, right? You must have, if you're Catholic, you must take, to be in good standing with the Church and canon law, you must partake of the Eucharist, the Holy Communion, on Sundays. And so I definitely hear, Marcy's plea to canon law in a lot of ways. And so it makes sense that since she hasn't heard from the Archdiocese, that they would take their appeal directly to Rome. That all being said, again, as a scholar of Roman Catholicism in the United States, and as an ethnographer, and also as a historian who's done a deep dive into American Catholic history, one of the things that stands out to me, and this is what I'm curious about, I'm curious if, let's say, this particular parish, St. Mary's, is still going to be on the list to not have Sunday Eucharist. I'm wondering if the Archdiocese could appoint an extraordinary minister of the Eucharist, right? They're called EMHCs. Women can also serve as EMHCs. Now, these are special liturgical duties, right? It's not as though any lay Catholic can give the consecrated host. And again, only a priest or bishop can consecrate the host. But currently, deacons or male or female EMHCs can administer the Eucharist. And so I'm wondering if there could be a compromise if the Archdiocese, keeps St. Mary's on their list, if you will. I'm wondering if maybe a parishioner from St. Mary's could be given that special designation so that they do have someone qualified, and again, according to canon law and church law, that they could do that. Marcy made a compelling plea saying, there's a lot of older, Catholics, and for whom, going to Mass, it's about the Eucharist, but it's also about being part of community. These folks might be in a nursing home or a retirement home, and it's a big deal to be out with your people, in this case with Catholics. So again, not knowing the Archdiocese's perspective on this and just hearing from Marcy, just drawing on my knowledge of the Church, I'm wondering if a compromise could be made, to enable the parishioners to have Eucharist on Sunday, and also, to stick with the Archbishop's plan of, the 24 pastorates and all the other things that are involved in that.
If you've just joined us, Kristy Nabhan-Warren is a scholar of Catholic studies at the University of Iowa. I think listeners will want to know, what is going on in the Catholic Church, shrinking in some places, and now with the new Pope growing in other areas. We have, of course, the Catholic Church in past years, in the news, the priest shortage, which has lasted a long time, but also the sex abuse scandal, the shadow of that. Yes. What do those two things in our Catholic news have to do with this downsizing in one sense, or perhaps they have nothing to do with it in your view?
Oh, I think, that's such an excellent, complicated question. I think the best questions are complicated, Ben, so I appreciate you asking that. Absolutely. I mean, and in our state of Iowa, right? I mean, the sex abuse scandal has touched quite a few dioceses across the United States and globally. And I really, as a scholar and as a human and as a parent, right, of 3 now grown children, I understand from a parent's view, from Catholic perspective, the church really hasn't done enough to reckon with this crisis, right? It's paid out money, right, but it really hasn't issued the kind of apology, and not only apology, but really doing something about it. And so a lot of young families, I think, in the 90s and the early 2000s, we saw quite a few, and I don't have the stats on me, but quite a few Catholic families, start going to evangelical services where they felt like there were more services for their children, where they felt like it was maybe a little less patriarchal and hierarchical. And I use the term patriarchy not as a negative thing, but the Roman Catholic Church is a deeply patriarchal church, right? Only men can be ordained as priests. It's very top down. And while we've had popes, Pope Francis for one, and the current Pope Leo, who seem to be much more in tune with laity and a much softer touch in their leadership style, I think that the Roman Catholic Church writ large still has a lot of work to do to convince families that the church is safe for their children. Now, while we see a decline in mass attendance across rural Iowa, we see an uptick in urban milieus such as Des Moines, Chicago, New York, Boston, and these are primarily among younger millennial, older millennial, and also older Gen Z Catholics. I find this really fascinating. We see this, in the Des Moines diocese as well, where I believe it's 52% uptick in conversions to Roman Catholicism over the last calendar year, which is fascinating to me as a scholar.
So what is driving that, Kristy, in your estimation?
I think there's, again, multiple factors. There's never sort of one thing that's causing or correlating, right? I think it's in the age of AI and the dehumanization of humans, and Pope Leo has a lot to say about this. He just came out with this in a pastoral letter. Young people are starting to push back against AI-dominated society, global society, we can say, and they're longing for in-person, in real-time, face-to-face, gatherings, and church is one of those. I mean, whether it's coffee houses, what sociologists have called third spaces. Third spaces are those spaces outside of work and home where humans have long found, places to commune, whether it's a bar, a park, a library, a restaurant, book clubs, right? And churches, of course, are one of these third spaces. And there's that holy dimension to it as well, right? Which is an added bonus for people, right? It's a special kind of third space. And I think that, I have 3 children. They're all Gen Zers. They're all 3 of them, and I see with their friends in high school and college, they're all wanting to do things like sewing, having sewing clubs, or writing, not using ChatGPT, meeting up in person. And I think that this is a part of this rise in conversions as well as mass attendance among young Catholics is part of a broader movement that in part is a backlash to AI.
The first American-born Pope elected in May of last year. How much does his presence, his leadership have to do with this this growth, do you think?
I think a lot. It's really interesting, though. A very good friend of mine, Kathleen Cummings, she's at Notre Dame, University of Notre Dame. She just came out with a really wonderful op-ed in the New York Times, basically saying, that yes, Pope Leo is an American-born pope. And also, he really considers himself more of a global citizen. His address was not in English. He considers himself, a global citizen. And so I think for American Catholics, yes, it does matter that he is a quote-unquote American-born pope, South Side of Chicago, White Sox fan, right? There's all these memes going around with him eating a hot dog and, drinking a beer, which are really funny, playful. But I think that I think it's important to say that the Pope himself really sees himself as more of a global citizen. But yes, for American Catholics who have long seen themselves as exceptional, pros and cons to that, right? And this goes back to the 16th century. Historians talk about continuity and change. American Catholics, we can say, have long thought of themselves as being exceptional. So I think it's no surprise that because we have the first quote-unquote American-born pope, that I do think it's part of the reason why young people are excited. People are excited. Catholics are excited,
Well, Kristy, what do you make of the fact that I understand English language masses can be sparsely attended in many places, while Spanish language mass is more robust? What does that tell you about the future of the American Catholic Church?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I looked at this in my last book, Meatpacking America. Not only in the Midwest do we see, in our state of Iowa, do we see the Roman Catholic Church becoming globalized. We have, there are services in Burmese, services in French for the Congolese primarily, services in Spanish. In Iowa City, there's a Congolese priest, so there's a French-speaking mass, which, and so I think this is not only in Iowa, but in the Midwest and across the U.S. I think absolutely. And in this time in which we see so many anti-immigrant, anti-refugee, rhetoric and linguistics on a national scale, the reality is that immigrants and refugees, a multilingual America, is precisely why churches are being revitalized. Churches like the Roman Catholic Church. For example, in Columbus Junction, the English-speaking Mass is sparsely attended, but the Spanish-speaking Mass is literally bursting at the seams. And so I think that, and you'll see this in rural parishes across Iowa, that it's the Spanish-speaking Masses that, you don't have enough seats. But the English-speaking Masses, because quite honestly, the white Catholics are starting to die out in these rural spaces. It's sad, and when I would attend these English-speaking Masses as an ethnographer, I really stood out. But when I sat in on the Spanish-speaking Masses, I really blended in. So I was one of many. So yeah.
As we come to the end of this conversation, Kristy, I wonder what you think a healthy, sustainable American Catholic Church looks like in 10 or 20 years. Is the Dubuque Archdiocese, that model of restructuring, pointing a way forward or away from a sustainable Catholic Church in the future, do you think?
Boy, that is a whopper of a question, Ben. Thank you for that. Good and bad.
Sure.
I think that JIF, I'll call it JIF because Marcy also referred to it as JIF, so hopefully that's okay for my Catholic friends out there. I think that JIF could be seen, again, it's too soon to know. And I've known Archbishop Zinkala for quite some time, by the way, and he is a champion of the global church. He's been really involved with the Catholic worker movement. He's very pro-immigrant, refugees, an incredibly thoughtful human. And I say this as a scholar who has worked with him and who has talked with him from time to time. I do think that JIF can be seen at this early stage as really giving a good faith effort to listen to parishioners, to have, hundreds of listening sessions. It has not been a top-down process. From what I've read and seen, it has been a very thoughtful, iterative process that's taken place over a year or so. Hard decisions have to be made. I do think Marcy and her community do make a good case, though, and so I hope things work out for them. I do think that we're going to need to see a change in how things are run with the institutional church, especially in areas that are sparsely populated like rural Iowa. And I do think that we do need to think very long and hard about how to maintain representation within parishes, because the church is changing. American society is changing. Some people don't want to see that, but it is an increasingly global, as we see with the World Cup, right? We're an increasingly global society, global United States. So I hope the church takes advantage of this positive momentum. I'll give a pitch for the World Cup and, really embrace America and what that might look like for the church.
Thank you so much for coming into our studio once again. Kristy Nabhan-Warren, professor and Figge Chair in Catholic Studies at the University of Iowa. Thank you for your views and expertise, Kristy.
Thank you, Ben. I appreciate your viewpoints as always.
Coming up after a short break, Deacon John Robbins. He's Director of Communications at the Archdiocese of Dubuque. It's River to River from IPR News. And we're back with more River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer, talking today about two stories in Iowa Catholicism, a national surge in Catholic converts, and a major restructuring in the Archdiocese of Dubuque that will end weekend Mass at 84 churches beginning July 14th. The Archdiocese calls it the Journey in Faith Initiative, reorganizing these 160 parishes in the Archdiocese into 24 regional clusters called pastorates. Earlier in the hour, if you were with us, you heard Marcy Horst, a parishioner at St. Mary's Catholic Church in Vinton. Her parish has roughly 450 members, has invested more than $1 million in improvements at the Archdiocese's direction, and is still lost, according to plans, its weekend Mass in the final plan. She told us her elderly neighbors, young families, feel betrayed, and that many have said they simply won't attend a Mass elsewhere. Joining us now, live, Deacon John Robbins, the Director of Communications for the Archdiocese of Dubuque. Deacon Robbins, welcome to you.
Thank you, Ben. Appreciate you having me here.
We'd like to invite our listeners to join this conversation. If you're part of a parish affected by the Journey in Faith restructuring, or if you're among the Iowans who've recently joined or returned to the Catholic Church, we want to hear from you. We'll have to make it quick. We only have less than 20 minutes. Call us, 866-780-9100, or email us, river2river@iowapublicradio.org. We don't have much time, Deacon, so we want to get through a lot of material here. I'm sure you have plenty of reaction. You've been listening to the first part of our program. But first of all, to lay a foundation, what is the Journey in Faith Initiative? Remind us, and what is it trying to accomplish? What forces are driving it?
Yeah, certainly, Ben. So Journey in Faith is our planning initiative here in the Archdiocese of Dubuque. And with it, we have the goals of renewing discipleship, strengthening parish vibrancy through increased collaboration, supporting our priests, and creating a sustainable structure of parishes through these pastorate groupings. And so I know that that word has been used a few times, pastorate, these groupings of parishes. And in order to renew our discipleship, strengthen our vibrancy, and support our priests within these structures, we have to collaborate in new ways. And so that's really what this is about. In order to do that, we recognize that, good, holy work has been done and is being done by good, holy people. And at the same time, there are these sobering realities that we deal with. So in the past 20 years, we've had our Mass attendance down 46%, infant baptisms down 22%, funerals have actually increased a bit, 3%, and we're using right now 37% of our church capacities. And so with all these in mind, we are saying we need to do things differently, and we're concerned not about the future. We're actually quite hopeful about the future, but we have to find a way to, as they say, move from maintenance mode, kind of the way things have been, to a missionary mode, to really be who we're called to be as an archdiocesan church, as a people.
Mm-hmm. When you say from maintenance mode to mission mode, what does that actually look like day to day compared to what these parishes have been doing?
Mm-hmm. And so that's where we want to start again by saying we know that good holy work is being done by good holy people. But some of the statistics that have been mentioned on this show are accurate, and just kind of the overall view of where historically maybe the church in general, not just in this country, but maybe what we've learned in Catholicism, that we need to speak more openly about our relationship with Jesus, the transformation we've experienced. And so we acknowledge that this is happening throughout our parishes and the good work. But what we've done is we've addressed kind of isolated incidents on a case-by-case basis, and we're seeing that we're still needing to lift ourselves up. Again, not so much from an isolated perspective, but a family, a diocesan church. There's more that we need to do, and kind of those statistics I shared kind of paint that picture for us. So we're very hopeful, but acknowledging that we know this is a tough time, and we want to be sensitive to the people that are feeling that very real loss of a specific community gathering, because that's not a small thing. Our combined
it isn't. It is not. Deacon Robbins and you and I and the rest of the listeners here just heard from Marcy Horst in Vinton, a parishioner at St. Mary's, a church that is a parish that is active, debt-free, up to 250 people at a weekend mass, spending a lot of money on improvements at the direction of the Archdiocese. She says they met every criterion. Still, the plan is they will lose the weekend mass in the beginning of July. What do you say to her and other parishes in a similar situation with, I mentioned the word betrayal from the people there. What do you say to them?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to recognize that we understand that it feels that way. And we understand all these emotions. And so we don't want to combat them or try and make people feel guilt for feeling them. Quite the opposite. We want to acknowledge those. We want to let them know that we hear it, that from the outset we've kind of understood that this is going to require some difficulty and some pain as we continue to grow. Archbishop has been clear about that and has communicated in video messages and writing that he's not unaware of that. He's very much with the people physically on weekends, but also spiritually. When it comes to specific instances, what we have to be careful to do is to not treat parameters that we communicated openly on the Journey in Faith website like they're check boxes that an individual location, an individual group of Catholics might be able to just check off and say, okay, there's not change for us. There's going to be change for everybody. Back in September, on the FAQ portion of that website, we wanted people to know, and so we put a common question there to say that even if you were in one of these first models that was proposed, those are proposals. They're meant to start discussion. It was never kind of a promise, and so we can look and say, yeah, they doing this, and this box is checked off. But then we have to look at the communities around them in a bigger sense. And I think Marcy gets that. I think that she was talking about other rural folks. She was talking about where they are regionally. But we really have to keep in mind that we're looking at the whole rather than individuals. And we have to keep in mind about how many people, in all areas, all directions, are going to be a part of that communal collaboration and how far they have to drive as well. So it's really about looking at the whole.
Talk specifically about a priest celebrating, I understand, up to 5 masses over a single weekend. Help us understand and picture that. What does that look like? And why does the larger church say that is not sustainable?
Yeah, I'll do my best to share what I know. So in our diocese and other rural dioceses, it's been common as we kind of address this parish by parish and instance by instance to try and resolve matters by having maybe one priest care for maybe the Catholics in the majority of a county, maybe 5, as many as 6 different churches. That's a lot of time on the road, away from people. And that people can underestimate really the amount of spiritual and mental energy that can go into that. And so the church, seeking to care for its ministers, has certain guidelines, and some of them are that we need to follow, and are getting to a point where we are setting up a best case scenario for our priests. But what we don't want to do is kind of focus on that as if that's what has caused this. Again, some of those really sobering numbers that I shared about in 20 years, 46% in our diocese of Catholics have stopped attending. We're concerned about today's parishioners and today's faith communities, and we're concerned about those who we've left, and we don't want that to be our future.
Yeah, we certainly appreciate you joining us live, Deacon John Robbins of the Archdiocese of Dubuque. Let's get to some listener reaction. Matt is joining us from Mason City. Matt, coming up on the end of our hour, sure glad you can join us. What's on your mind here?
Yeah, I'm from Epiphany Parish, and we have masses, but I also have brothers who are in the Clear Lake Pastorate in Lake Mills. They're going to lose their weekend masses. But one thing that we're grateful for in this priest shortage is that Cedar Rapids Xavier is producing a lot of young priests and a lot of good young priests. And I think a lot of the other Catholic schools, I mean, I have 2 boys in their 20s who are both Mason City Newman graduates. I think a lot of the places need to pick up on the vocations and maybe look at what Cedar Rapids Xavier is doing that's producing all these great young priests. And
Matt, thank you very much.
Solve some problems like that way.
Good point, Matt. And Deacon addressed that about up-and-coming priests, young people who show interest in the priesthood, as Matt, and what the church is doing there to invigorate that future.
Yeah, appreciate the call, Matt. And Matt makes some good observations about priests that have come from that particular area of our diocese. That's absolutely true. And one of the things that we think will be a natural outgrowth from our efforts to have vibrant liturgies in which that aren't 37% filled to capacity at church, but are full with people that are actively working together in new relationships, is that will inspire within people just to be able to hear the Lord speak to their hearts, calling them to their particular vocation in life. That to be part of a lively, engaged, vibrant, spiritual, communal worship will only help vocations, the priesthood and others.
Let's go to Pat. Pat joining us from Cedar Rapids, I believe. Welcome to the program, Pat.
Yes. I have a question that I wrote to the bishop and, of course, have not heard about. I'd like to ask the Pope. I think the root cause of this whole problem, the reason so many of my generation left the church, is because there was not a priest there for us. And you risk that happening with the new generation that's coming up looking for connection rather than isolation and loneliness. So my question is, does God not grant enough vocations to the priesthood to meet the needs of its people? Or does the church fail to recognize over half of the vocations God grants?
Oh, okay. We're talking then about women in the priesthood, I think there, Pat, as you gingerly walked up to that. What do you have to say to that, please, Deacon Robbins?
I don't know that it's in either or that those are the only 2 options. And I don't know that those are questions that can truly be answered, at least at a local level. I can tell you that what we're interested in doing is supporting the priests that we do have and creating vibrant communities so that we can have more. And we're also focused on the laity stepping up in ways that they can in these vibrant communities.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Deacon, I think you've acknowledged there's a very real possibility, or at least perhaps the Archdiocese of Dubuque, the possibility that some of these churches may eventually need to close if members stop contributing financially. How honest is the Archdiocese being with parishioners right now about that possibility? Is that a possibility?
Well, I would say that it's possible, but we're in this mode right now of trying to invite partnership and collaboration in new ways without from a top-down approach saying, you're closed and you're closed. And so parishes have this period of 6 months and then some time after to begin to figure out and to begin to organize structurally and work together as a community to begin to answer some of these long-term questions. Like there's this approach to both giving autonomy but also working together as one church, one local church. The professor from the University of Iowa talked a little bit about our approach, right? And that she saw that Archbishop Zinkula is genuinely concerned with input, and she recognized that. And so, that's a really important part here as well, that we are giving a certain amount of autonomy and time to figure things out. And so, rather than this top-down approach, there were 300 meetings and 5,000 submissions through a feedback form, and all that feedback was reviewed, and there's going to be additional input sessions here in this next phase. So we don't know what might happen, and we are truly open to God the Holy Spirit leading us. It does stand to reason that if support is not given, the best case scenario won't happen, and so we're asking for participation, trying to give autonomy, but it has to succeed together. We have to be together on this.
Deacon, one more quick question. So we only have 30 seconds for an answer. I understand there's one more major communication coming around in a few days' time, perhaps July 9th or 10th, just days before the changes take effect. What can you tell us about what that will say now, and really less than a minute, please?
Yeah, I'll make this quick. We are going to have another message from Archbishop on the eve of this new phase, and he's going to let the people know how dearly he cares about them and ask them to kind of be involved and get a chance, because they matter to him. They matter to all of us. We are the church together.
Deacon John Robbins of the Archdiocese of Dubuque, thank you for joining us live.
Thank you, Ben. Appreciate it.
Today's show was produced by Samantha McIntosh, technical support from Nev Kelly. I'm Ben Kiefer. Thanks for joining us.